This is the SF and SF podcast for June 2016. Recorded live at the American Bookbinders Museum, SF and SF is Science Fiction in San Francisco, a monthly series of author readings from the science fiction, fantasy, horror, and genre literary fields, hosted by Terry Bisson. And now, the coordinator of SF and SF, Rena Weissman.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Rena Weissman. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a great turnout. Lovely to have a full house for our event. It's always appreciated. So now you all have to come back next time. Like I said, I'm Rena Weissman. I am the coordinator of SF and SF, Science Fiction in San Francisco. We are here at the, as you can see, fabulous American Bookbinders Museum. Before I go any further, I'm going to introduce the person that kind of helps make all this possible by being an employee of the American Bookbinders Museum and a notable and talented author in her own right, Madeline Robbins.
Surely you are talking about someone else. Hi, welcome to the American Bookbinders Museum. We are the only bookbinding museum in this hemisphere. There's one in Turkey, I think, or Mainz, Germany. I'm not sure which. But what we are interested in is really 19th century and the shift from hand bookbinding to the Industrial Revolution, which made mass market publishing possible and made many of our careers possible. Anyway, we are open on Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. We have 3 tours a day at the moment, which are at 10, 1, and 3. And the tours are really necessary because they're just pieces of interesting looking metal until you know what they mean and the context. So I urge and implore you all to come back and visit and see what this museum has. We're trying to add more and more features to it. And I guess that's all really I have to say. I'll be up in the front selling things later.
Thank you, Madeline.
And as always, we're delighted you're here.
Yes, thank you. So just a little housekeeping info. As you know, we happen pretty much every month. So I want to let you know, coming up, we have some amazing events as well. On Sunday, July 12th, we'll be welcoming authors Richard Kadri. Hi, Richard. Oh, you're right there. Who is also in the audience tonight, along with a great short story writer from the Netherlands, Thomas Oldhuvalt, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Thomas. Then in August, we have a really good event, especially if you have teens or YA readers in your household, please bring them along. On Sunday, August 14th, we'll have David D. Levine with Arabella of Mars, which is as steampunky as the title sounds. It's really cool. Cecil Castellucci and short story writer Ben Laurie. So we're looking forward to them. And then in September, we are very pleased to be presenting author Robert Silverberg in conversation with his, I guess, co-editor on a book called Conversations, Alvaro's... Zeno Amaro's. I always get tripped up on his name. Sorry, Alvaro. We also are going to be featuring some films. Our kind of secondary event series is in conjunction with the Balboa Theater out in the Richmond. Great old-time San Francisco movie theater, one of 12 single screens left standing in San Francisco, if you can believe that. But they have a great concession stand, fabulous chocolates, and we're going to be doing a couple screenings coming up with them. One is Finding Dory, because we all loved Finding Nemo, right? And then we're going to be offering some tickets for the upcoming latest superhero blockbuster thing called Suicide Squad. And just to keep you all on tenterhooks, we'll also be doing a preview screening for the latest Star Trek. Woo! So very excited about that. And they've been a great partner with the SF and SF as well. So if you hear a little baby crying, that is our newest and latest fan back there. So we believe in bringing them into the field young. So we're very pleased to have them here. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to our moderator, Terry Bisson. Enjoy the evening.
Well, I'm not going to take a lot of time. Just remind everybody to turn your phones on in case something better comes along. And but tonight's kind of interesting. We have two writers who are quite well known and distinguished in the science fiction field, but they're different in a way. They're writers that have both had careers, not just jobs, but careers, and actually have contributed to their field outside of science fiction in particular ways. Our first reader tonight is Michael Blumlein. He's a physician, a medical doctor. He's also a accomplished and well-known, sort of a writer's writer, but he's got a reputation in the field and has been doing it for a while. And he's also a bit of a poet, I believe. We're in a poetry group together, and it's quite successful because we never read one another's poetry. We read actual serious poetry. Yeah. So anyway, his career in science fiction, he has a number of books. The Brains of Rats, which is a book of short stories, I believe. XY, which is a novel. It's been made into a film. More recently, we have The Healer and the Roberts, which comes from Tachyon. He is I would say he's been nominated for the World Fantasy Award and also the Bram Stoker, which is a horror award. And he is, to my knowledge, probably the only working science fiction writer who doesn't have an asteroid named after him. And so Michael is going to begin our program tonight. Michael Blumlein.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Rena, wherever Rena is, and Jacob for hosting this. Thank you, Madeline, for hosting. And I want to thank Rudy for inviting me to join him tonight. Just a word, years ago at one of the very first conventions I ever went to over at the Claremont Hotel, I was in the audience watching the panel, and I think I knew Rudy a little, but not very much, and I was just struck dumb by his humor, his erudition, how eloquent he was, and I just wish someday I could be like that, and to share the stage with him is really an honor, so it's great. Thank you. About almost 2 years ago now, a group of us, about 15 people, went on an expedition to the Sierras. And we had two things in common. One was a love of the mountains and the Sierras in particular. And the other was the belief that something was missing from the mountains. Now, in the Sierras, virtually every peak is named after someone famous. Famous explorers, famous scientists, famous naturalists. But none was named after arguably one of the greatest American naturalists of the last 3 centuries, Henry Thoreau. So we went up to rectify that oversight, and we found an unnamed peak, and we hiked up, and we named it Henry David Thoreau Peak. And then we came down and we partied for 2 days. And at the party, different people shared readings of Thoreau that were meaningful to them. They shared original work. Poets read poetry. We had artists who showed their art. Photographers showed their photography. And now all that stuff that came out in that day-long celebration is being collected in a book that is coming out next year, which is very exciting. And I am going to read an excerpt from an essay I wrote for that book. And the essay is called Thoreau's Microscope. In the Sierras, there are mountains named for Muir, Mendel, Darwin, and Emerson, Thoreau was no less a giant of thought. He was no less a giant in his powers of description and the beauty of his language. He was no less a giant in the world of nature and science. He had the obsessive mind and habits of a scientist. He was detailed in his observations and punctilious in writing them down. He carried a pencil and diary on his daily walks, a spyglass for looking at birds, a book to press plants, and along with a growing number of geologists, botanists, and biologists, a field microscope. In the early 1800s, any naturalist worth his salt carried a field microscope. 150 years prior to that, before Thoreau was using his to look at tree rings, pond scum, and mushroom caps, Antony van Leeuwenhoek was looking through his radically new 1 by 2 inch flattened brass microscope and seeing a little swimming thing he called an animalcule. It was the first recorded glimpse of microscopic animal life. Leeuwenhoek's microscope was a revolution in the age-old art of microscopy and optics, able to magnify things an astounding 300 times, and people flocked from all over, hoping to go home with one. Scientists begged for its secret, which lay in the lens barely bigger than the head of a pin, and which Leeuwenhoek steadfastly refused to reveal. He was a scientist, yes, but first and foremost, he was a merchant and a businessman with a businessman's understanding of the particular power of proprietary information. Had he lived 150 years earlier in Holland, Thoreau would certainly have known Leeuwenhoek. He probably would have liked him. He definitely would have admired his inventiveness and his industry. He would have loved to score one of his scopes, but he would have hated the secrecy surrounding it. Secrecy is anathema to the true scientist. Science and its practitioners have a higher purpose than profit. Innovation requires perspiration, sure, but inspiration too. And how can you put a number to something that is born of and owes its value to the human spirit? You can't, and it's wrong to try. Freedom of thought carries a social responsibility, especially when that thought leads to something of value. You've discovered a new way to see, a way that not only magnifies, not only deepens, but revolutionizes what we know of life. Uncool to keep it to yourself. Why be stingy when nature is not? Thoreau is the classic case of the poet-scientist, the ardent, emotive, wool-gathering, free-thinking, and opinionated artist trapped in the body of a sober, level-headed, and dispassionate rationalist, and vice versa. I say trap, but it's more a cohabitation, each half infiltrating, illuminating, and regularly delighting the other. When he's not poor beyond words and insecure because of it, the poet-scientist is happy as a clam because he knows he sees things as they truly are, as much as humanly possible. Sight, true sight, brings a kind of ecstasy. The poet-scientist is that lucky man or woman who gets to experience the ecstasy of science, which is the ecstasy of everything in its place, of order, logic, and reason, as well as the ecstasy of poetry, of art, which is the ecstasy of plunging into the unknown and being swept away, the ecstasy of surrender. Late in his life, Thoreau had this to say about microscopes. Science is inhuman. Things seen with a microscope begin to be insignificant. So described, they are as monstrous as if they should be magnified 1,000 diameters. With our prying instruments, we disturb the balance and harmony of nature. Science is inhuman. Perfect science, that is, if there is such a thing. Inhuman in the sense of unfeeling, impersonal, amoral, and unprejudiced. With our instruments, we do pry. With or without instruments, we humans are disturbers par excellence. Yet here we are, and there Thoreau was, after a lifetime of looking and looking closer, saying it was time to stop. He died 3 years later, almost to the day, of tuberculosis. The disease was known as consumption then, for the way it literally consumed a person's vitality and life. 1 in 7 Europeans died of it. The disease was felt by many to be hereditary. 20 years after Thoreau's death, Robert Koch proved that it was not. Using a brand new staining technique and state-of-the-art microscope, Koch identified the causative agent, which he named Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It would be some time before an effective treatment existed, but Koch's discovery was critical in paving the way. Imagine Thoreau living a mere 20 years longer. The news of Koch's discovery spread in its day like wildfire. He most certainly would have known of it. How would he have felt then of the insignificant things seen under the microscope? For a man of nature in the natural world where there was nothing that didn't spark his interest and little that he didn't document scrupulously year after year to the tune of 3,000 journal pages, Thoreau was remarkably reticent when it came to his own health. He rarely mentions it, and never at length, not the length you'd expect of a man of science. Human health and disease had as much to teach him about the laws of nature, about balance, nourishment, depletion, and decay, as the woods he so loved. But it's as if he were deaf to them, or mostly deaf. He does refer to his health from time to time, typically in glancing terms. From his journal, 1855, no doubt the healthiest man in the world is preventing from doing what he would like by sickness. His journal again, 1859. I am inclined to think of late that as much depends on the state of the bowels as of the stars. And in 1861, I've been sick so long that I have almost forgotten what it is to be well. Yet I feel that in all respects only my envelope. Many people are private when it comes to their health. They prefer not to prate about their woes and parade their infirmities. Still, from a man devoted, obsessively, to the closely observed life, he gives us precious little. We never read, for example, how the distance he was able to walk diminished steadily as consumption destroyed his lungs. We never read how tired he was. He never tells us the number of days he was feverish, and when the fever was accompanied by a shaking, chill, and drenching sweat. He never talked about how it felt to cough his guts out, and when he wasn't coughing, how it felt to be starved for air, how beyond being continually short of breath, he was starved for energy, including and most killingly the energy to form coherent original thought. He never mentioned how it felt to have his life eaten away, to be consumed, parasitized, as it were, from the inside out. How it called to mind a particular parasitic wasp, which itself called to mind an historic, perhaps mythic event which he'd read in Virgil or Ovid. He never talked about any of this, nor the fact that his own sister died of the same disease at the age of 36. Suddenly we see a man renowned for being fearlessly outspoken in a different light, restrained, discreet, a New Englander where these qualities are as bred in the bone among the educated and genteel as they are wondered at and found to be of little use by those of a more uninhibited, confessional nature, such as Walt Whitman, who knew Thoreau and in so many other respects was like him. It's no sin to be restrained. It's no sin to be discreet. In the right hands at the right time, these can be virtues, if not gifts, which is only to say that self-exposure, particularly of the most intimate, gruesome physical details of one's own body and health, as riveting and irresistible as it may sound, it's not everyone's cup of tea. January 15, 2013. Today I had tears in my eyes. The feeling hits me every so often out of nowhere. What triggered it today? Walking alone in the cold winter morning to the hospital for my pre-op blood draw. The alone part. We all are, but still. It was cold and I was lonely. January 16. Sitting in exam room where I've spent thousands upon thousands of hours as MD. Comfortable, familiar. One of Netter's fine illustrations on the wall, this one of the cardiac anatomy. Drawing of heart transected and transverse and coronal planes. Normally I love this stuff, and I love it now. But thinking about getting cut up myself, it also gives me the creeps. January 3rd, 2 weeks earlier, CT scan today. Afterwards, finagle my way into the reading room. Meet the radiologist, like me, loves his job. More than happy to talk about the study. Doctor to doctor, no holds barred. Just the facts. I love it. My first reaction on seeing the mass, how beautiful. It grows along the path of the lung, and the lung is beautiful. It's a tree, literally a tree of breath, which means it's the tree of life. All nature is beautiful. January 15. This ability I have, that most doctors have, to view things with a detached clinical eye, difficult things like pain, suffering, and illness. Hilary Mantel in her novel Wolf Hall has this to say: there are some strange, cold people in the world. It is priests, I think, training themselves out of natural feeling. They mean it for the best, of course. There are some strange, cold people in the world. But do not mistake distance for coldness. Some of us use distance because we run too hot, because without it our feelings would overwhelm us. And yes, it does require training. Any craft to be of use requires discipline. Discipline is what allows me the great pleasure of having a candid conversation with my surgeon when we discussed basically how he's going to stab me in the chest and tear my lung out. January 17, the day before surgery. Spirit's good. Try not to think of sharp, pointed objects puncturing my chest. Instead, think of pressing the button of the patient-controlled post-op dilaudid drip. Swimming in a sea of narcotics. I'm very curious about this. Lots of hugs from my wife. The sweetness just overflows. I feel like I'm living in a state of grace. Long conversation with my daughter. Like me, a concrete thinker. Couldn't quite visualize what the surgery entails and needed to. So I pulled out my old anatomy text. Big, thick book with beautiful, detailed drawings. The one of the lung particularly good. Each lobe clearly marked and color-coded. The surgery textbook also useful. Explaining is a way of containing. She's of the opinion that ultimately we have no control over our fate. Ultimately, I'd have to agree. But short of ultimately, I'd say my fate is in the hands of the man who's going to cut me open. More tears after a call from my sister. We say the things we usually don't. Why the tears? Because the feelings of love and attachment are so old and primitive and sacred that it seems as if we're breaking an oath to speak of them. An unspoken oath between sister and brother, forgotten over the years of living our separate lives, not to desert one another. January 21, post-op day 3. Chest tubes in. 3 of them dangling down like extra appendages. Tube in penis, tubes in arms, tubes everywhere except nose now out. Small apical pneumo detected on chest X-ray. January 23. You'd think every moment would be precious. If cancer is good for anything, you'd think it would be good for this. Here's an incomplete list of the good. 1, I've seen and talked to lots of friends. Some I would have in the normal course of events. Others I might not have for years. 2, I've learned how a lung is taken out. It's a marvel of science, combining careful attention to detail, deftness, and brute force, as so much of surgery does. 3, I've learned this about myself, that I'm not afraid of death in the way I thought I might be. That if I do die from this, I won't kick and curse. I'll be at peace for what I've accomplished. Will I be at peace for who I've been, which is different? I can't answer that yet. Maybe that's another good from cancer. I can work on this. January 24. My wife this morning says on a different topic entirely, it's good to take action, even if it's a small action. I heartily agree. Taking action seems tantamount to being alive. Making a decision and following it through is one form of action. Relinquishing control, surrendering to what may be, is another. February 1. My surgeon called yesterday with the pathology results. The good news, the lymph nodes are clear. The bad, the cancer is bigger than originally thought. Also, there are microfoci of cancer at the staple line where the lung was taken out, meaning there isn't a clear margin between cancer and normal tissue, meaning it's likely there's cancer still inside. These selections are from a journal I kept after being diagnosed with lung cancer. This was before I was thinking about Thoreau, which turned out to be the doorway into talking about my illness. The journal runs to many thousands of words. Strangely, missing entirely from it is an extraordinary encounter I had after my first surgery with a pulmonary pathologist at the university where I worked, a young, energetic, widely respected expert in the field of lung cancer. Extraordinary for how generous he was, how quick to say yes when I asked if he'd look at my slides and offer his opinion. Extraordinary for how small his office was, despite his standing, how cluttered with books and journals and specimen slides, how little the clutter mattered to him, and how reassuring this was to me. Extraordinary for how friendly he was and simultaneously focused on the business at hand, which were the slides I'd brought, which he unpacked and slid into place on the staging platform with practiced agility and grace. Extraordinary for the tingle I felt sitting opposite him and peering into the microscope, a teaching microscope with 2 sets of eyepieces. How effortlessly I fell into the role of objective observer. This stained 2-dimensional slice of the natural world, the beauty of it, the intelligent design, the efficiency, made my heart race. I was catapulted back 40 years to my days as a medical student, looking at slides under the microscope, slides of normal and abnormal tissue, normal and abnormal cells, slides of health and disease. In those days, there were 2 main obstacles to a long life: cancer and heart disease. The heart could be treated, cancer not so much. Both were enemies, but cancer was the enemy and the worst possible kind of enemy. Irrational, implacable, and inhuman. An alien presence to wake our worst nightmares and most deep-seated fears. Under the microscope, a cancer cell looks different from a normal cell. Its nucleus is dark and fat, effacing all but the thinnest rim of normalcy. A dark, fat, evil eye, sinister and malignant. As a student, I developed a reflex, visceral reaction of horror and antipathy on seeing it. 40 years later, I felt it again. My stomach clenched, the breath caught in my chest as though it were yesterday. How extraordinary, I thought, the persistence of reflexive behavior. How extraordinary the strength of the xenophobic response. And how extraordinarily quickly these dissipated as the scientist in me, the lover of knowledge and of nature, took over, and shock and fear gave way to awe. I understood what I hadn't 40 years before, what no one had. Cancer is not alien. It's not other. It's our own selves gone awry. And as such, it's a window into who we are, a deep, deep window into the infinitely complex, infinitely precise, exquisitely balanced bacchanal of life. Cancer teaches us how cells divide and what makes them stop dividing, or in cancer's case, not. How one cell, sperm and egg, becomes trillions of cells. How cells differentiate into other cells. How from a single lumpy, homogeneous-ish mass, we sprout fingers, brains, and blood. It teaches us how we grow, and in nature, growth is life. Having cancer is no picnic, but thinking about cancer is about as good as it gets. Its dark, fat eye may presage nasty things to come, but it isn't evil. It's beautiful, miraculous even, the way all life is. It signifies imbalance, which is a fact of life, and at the same time holds the keys to restoring the balance, the keys, in effect, to its own demise. A month later, I had a second lobe of my lung removed. I was now missing 2 out of 5. On the upside, I still had 3 left. Oncologists are nothing if not optimists, and mine assured me I could run a marathon on 3 lobes. Our mountain expedition was no marathon, not as mountain expeditions go, but it was no cakewalk either. I was there to honor Thoreau, but more than that, I was there to see if I could climb a mountain again, and to be with my friends who climbed mountains, to share in that particular joy, which is profound and endorphin-rich. Where the air is thin, the pleasure is commensurably fat. Somewhere there's an equation that describes this. Long story short, I made it to the top along with 10 others. Peak 12691 is no longer merely a number. I, for one, am happy to have a Mount Thoreau. Our modest expedition got me to read him again. It got me among friends and kindred spirits. It got me up, then down, another striking, quintessentially Sierra peak, to the party afterwards, which was magical and boisterous and lasted 2 full days. All this happened 1.5 years ago, though looking back it seems like yesterday. Since the cancer, time has been a consistently inconsistent companion. Days fly by. Nights frequently stretch on. More of both lately since learning that the cancer's back. Not in a single lobe this time, but all over. Thoreau was as reticent in talking about his impending death as he was in talking about what led to it. When he did, you have to admire his wit. In answer to the question, "Have you made your peace with God?" he replied, "I did not know we had ever quarreled." And to a friend who was pestering him for a glimpse of what lay on the opposite shore, he replied, "One world at a time." He hardly talked at all about the literal process of dying itself. In my experience, there are, roughly speaking, 2 ways to go, fast and slow. There is something to be said for sudden death. Whatever suffering is to be had lasts at most a few seconds, presumably. After that, peace, presumably. No one really knows, of course. Not so much peace for everyone else. To the living, sudden death shatters the peace. It's like a body blow, but to the psyche. For some, the aftershock lasts years. In slow death, you get the shock first, when you get the news. Cancer, metastatic. Treatable, but not curable, and maybe not even treatable. Now, for however long you have, you do your best to get the most out of life, to enjoy yourself and be as decent and good and as true to yourself and loving of others and of life in general as possible. Be prepared to be surprised. At times, I've been so happy that I scarcely recognize myself. The value of a slow death lies in the opportunity to shed your skin and reinvent yourself if needed, or to stick to your guns if not. In either case, it's a good time to turn your lens on what's important and to sharpen the focus. 6 weeks before his death, Thoreau wrote this: I suppose that I have not many months to live, but of course I know nothing about it. I may add that I am enjoying existence as much as ever and regret nothing. The other day I got up early, intending to begin the difficult process of sorting through a lifetime's worth of possessions. I'd filled up about half a box with books when the sun, which was not quite up, hit the big, puffy springtime clouds suspended above the Berkeley Hills, which I could see out my window, setting them aglow, then ablaze with gold and poppy-colored light. I had to stop and sit down. What I was seeing and feeling was too astonishing and spectacular to let pass unremarked. After the show was over, I found myself thinking about death. Not being dead, but the act of dying, the physical sensations I'd have, and the mental, the cognitive experience during the last moments, the final transition between life and death. How interesting will that be, I thought. I shared this thought with my wife. You're curious, she said. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Of course. Thank you.
That was pretty good. All right, you know the drill. We have two readers, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk about this stuff. So our next reader is one of what we call one of the dread lords of cyberpunk, along with Bill Gibson, Bruce Sterling, probably some people here. Kadri for sure. Michael, to some extent, was involved in that crowd, and had an influence on science fiction, to say the least. Rudy is not only a science fiction writer, he is a math professor and a professional mathematician, and he's been doing that with great distinction for a number of years. He's also a painter. He's also a blogger. He's also a publisher. His science fiction has, from the very beginning, back in the 60s, I guess, when I first met Rudy, we shared an agent, and so I knew about his work. And I also wrote the copy on some of his books, which always blended. To me, they blended science and fiction, and with a little bit of fantasy and a whole lot of comedy. He's best known, perhaps, for what's called the Ware Tetralogy, which started with software, wetware, realware, freeware, but there's many, many other books. The 57 Franz Kafka, the Sex Sphere, Rudy's also quite prolific. All these books had, I think, a tremendous influence on how people thought about fiction, how they thought about science fiction, how they thought about writing, and how it should be conducted. He's also written a historical novel about art, which is about Peter Bruegel, the senior, called As Above, So Below, which is, I know, quite an extraordinary blend of art history and, just history, like a historical novel, which didn't get the attention it deserved, but we all know how that works. He's also written nonfiction as a scientist, Infinity in the Mind, The Fourth Dimension, and, of course, Saucer Wisdom. And he is a two-time winner of the Philip K. Dick Award. and it's an honor to have him here. He's one of the people who I think without Rudy, science fiction would not be what it is today, and Rudy has apologized for this. So let me introduce Rudy Rucker.
It's a tough act to follow, Michael. I feel whatever I say is going to be sort of superficial. It's just so moving. I'm almost in tears. It was everything I was hoping for. Yeah. But this story actually involves somebody who dies, but it has a happy ending anyway, which you were looking for. Yeah. And let's see. I want to get a crutch to lean on while I'm doing this. Okay. So this story actually appeared in Lightspeed magazine in April. It's called The Knobby Giraffe. You heard me, The Knobby Giraffe. My name's Irit Ziv. I have a low-rent apartment in the East Village that I used to share with my girlfriend, Shirley Chen. It's April now, and Shirley died 4 months ago. Ever since then, I've been visiting Ma and Pa's flat in Brooklyn Heights a lot. An awesome spot with a full view of lower Manhattan. The trees by the river are turning green. I'm a grad student at NYU trying to finish a PhD thesis in the physics department. Physics was probably a bad choice for me, but it's too late to change. My thesis is about consciousness. I'm riffing on the quantum physics idea that you alter things by observing them. I dream of basing a technology on that. My research? Well, I've been spending a lot of time meditating in an MRI machine in the university labs. I'm lucky to have access to that thing. At first I was really happy about the numbers and graphs that the MRI prints out. But then, the last time I saw Shirley alive, she said my graphs were worthless. Logged my 100th hour on the MRI today, I was telling her that night in December. It was snowing, with Manhattan clean and still. I feel like I'm approaching a state where I can tweak the cosmos, I said, doing it with my head. You're beating a dead Schrodinger's cat, said Shirley. Or is it alive? Being a hardcore physics prof, she wasn't taking my ideas very seriously. Listen, Shirley, after my session today, I did a bunch of coin flips and I scored 9 heads in a row. The odds against that are over 500 to 1, exclaimed Shirley, mocking me with fake enthusiasm. Final proof that Irit Ziv's mind has attained direct matter control. Quantum telekinesis. Why do you always tease me, I asked. Can't anyone around here be smart instead of you? You're smart, Irit, but you're up a blind alley. Listen to me. The physics department is not going to approve a pile of self-aggrandizing crap. You're like a little girl making up stories about herself. I can fly. Watch me jump off the couch. You're supposed to be my thesis advisor, I said, suddenly close to tears. Shirley had never spoken quite so harshly to me before. I've been counting on you to win over the committee. I adore you, Irit, but there's only so far I can go. Everyone knows we're lovers. If your thesis is crap and I push it, then I look crooked, or like a fool. You have to give your ideas an academic slant, babe. Make them look respectable. In my introduction, I have a whole history of science thing about Leibniz's monadology, I said, which for some reason you refuse to read. Everything's a monad, right? Particles are monads, but so are bricks, dogs, and cities. There's no preferred level of scale. What would a monad look like if it was actually real, asked Shirley. They're like little balls or blobs. They're shiny and they reflect each other like ornaments on a Christmas tree. And thanks to the reflections, the monads are in eternal harmony. They're computing the world in parallel. The committee's going to ask what's inside one of those mirror balls, said Shirley. A parameter, I said. The secret code for the world. I smiled, happy with this idea. It's the same parameter inside every monad. The monads are like a zillion parallel computers crunching away on the same program. Not bad, said Shirley. Be sure to say it's a quantum computation and say it's all happening in Hilbert space. That's what quantum physicists like to hear about. Okay, fine, I said. And instead of saying the monads reflect each other, I can say they're quantum entangled. So if you change one monad, you change them all. But don't forget, I want to work my way around to direct matter control. If you can connect with the secret code inside even one monad, you're like a god. Shirley paused for a minute, then sighed and shook her head. That kind of talk is not going to fly, Irit. We're the physics department, okay? No superpowers. You've got to produce a formula that specifies how your monads behave. Call it monad rule. Shirley was writing on a piece of paper while she talked, something she liked to do. You'll say that our universe is being computed as monad rule applied to secret code. The secret code is an arbitrary initial input. Like a number or a specific point in Hilbert space, maybe you can suggest some possible toy universe type values for secret code. But mainly you need a precise symbolic description of monad rule. Otherwise, you're coming into your thesis defense like a crazy, mumbling acid head, and I'd have to vote thumbs down. What about my graphs of me meditating inside the MRI, I said. Aren't they enough? They're worthless crap, said Shirley. Nobody cares about them. Stop stalling, Irit. Do some actual freaking work. At this point, I lost it. Snobby goody-goody, I yelled. I wish you were dead. And then I stormed into the soft, snowy night and hooked up with a cute woman student from the Physics 101 lab section I was in charge of, spent the night at her place. The next morning I hear that Shirley is dead, run over by a cab, and I felt like it was my fault. So I started compulsively feeling around for the monad rule formula that Shirley had been asking for, brooding over it night and day, stuffing myself with technical physics papers, continually fiddling with patterns of symbols in my head. And then things came to a head on this April morning I'm telling you about. I'm in my parents' apartment, and Pa is sitting on a high stool at the counter beside our kitchen sink, staring at the water dribbling from the sink's faucet. He's painstakingly adjusting the flow to the point where the stream stutters into broken drops. Our little mutt dog, Ralphie, is sitting attentively at Pa's feet, wondering if food might drop off the counter. I need to get my Physics 101 lab, so I push past Pa and turn the faucet on high so I can brush my teeth. I can't use the bathroom because Ma's in there singing. She likes the echoes. Right now she's ramping up to perform as the Queen of the Night in Mozart's Magic Flute. Meanwhile, I have my unfinished formula rotating in my brain, surrounded by a cloud of jiggling mirror monads. It's an obsession, stronger today than ever before. Maybe I'm almost there, like a critical mass about to go thermonuclear. My teeth are symbols, 2 to the tooth power. Thanks for ruining my faucet setting, says Pa. I was just about to video the drip for data extraction. I should mention that Pa trades derivatives on the commodities exchange. His clients imagine he uses insider tips and computer algorithms. But in point of fact, Pa bases his predictions on natural chaos. This is a trick I taught him. It's lame to use a cheesy random number generator or a computer. It's better to use Mother Nature. Find something wobbly and chaotic. With this in mind, Pa had fixated on our kitchen sink, which can be a little inconvenient. The other traders don't make it so hard on their families, I tell him. When I said to use natural chaos, I meant you could, monitor the hiss on the radio. But no, you've got to take over our sink. And last night, I even saw you filming Ralphie scratching his ear. Hearing his name, the dog thumps his tail on the floor. 1 thump means sell, says Pa, smiling at me. 2 thumps is buy. The world brims with secret wisdom. That's what my daughter, the physicist, taught me. Your daughter who can't finish her thesis, I say. Meanwhile, I better get to the lab. Wait, says Pa, scatter this box of toothpicks onto the floor. I'll video that too. The dripping water will stand for oats, and the toothpicks can be palladium. I'll make a killing. And finally, I'll pay off your student loans, speaking of your never-ending thesis, which you mainly started as a way to impress Shirley Chen. If you had something against Shirley, why didn't you say so while she was alive, I snap at Pa, before she got mowed down by a moron in a cab? You're so... Irit, interrupts Pa. We loved Shirley. You're driving yourself crazy over I don't even know what. I pressed my hands against my eyes. The phosphenes look like symbols. Shirley said I needed to find a special formula, and I yelled at her, and then she was dead. If I can find the formula, it might bring her. Don't go down that road, says Pa. He pats my shoulder. Throw these toothpicks on the floor, okay? Scatter them real good, and be thinking about palladium. What does palladium even look like, I ask. Ingots, says Pa with a shrug. I'm trading palladium ingots against credit swaps on USDA number 2 oats. Sow the oats, I cry, flinging the toothpicks onto our kitchen floor. A welcome distraction, really. It's jazzing me up. I visualize the toothpicks as being the size of pencils, and then I see them as femtometer gluons connecting quarks. The half-finished monad rule in my head jiggles and glows, reflected a zillion times within the mirrors of my mind. In the bathroom, Ma's voice hits a peak, the F above high C. Perfect, says Pa, busy with his camera. The voice can be a correction term. Yes, say I. My formula is a stack of dishes balanced atop my head. They rattle and shift. I'm in the eye of a hurricane, in the funnel of a tornado. Behold, sings Ma. She strides into the kitchen, making an expressive solo of that one word. Her voice rises to a peak on the second syllable. She fixes her pale gray eyes on me, knowing and sympathetic. She already knows where I'm at. She always knows where I'm at, even when I don't. In that moment, my symbols finally click into place. The monad rule, a formula that generates our world from a parameter named secret code. I can see it in action, a writhing pattern in infinite dimensional Hilbert space, a dancer that sculpts the shapes of me, my parents, and the whole seething earth. Monad rule is the dappled sea wherein I swim. Can I touch this ocean's floor? Knowledge is power. I order the sea to roll away, and it obeys. The homey real world shivers and dwindles. It rushes away from me on every side. I'm re-normalizing the axes of my observational Hilbert space. The scene around me assumes a new look, like an oddly encoded video whose chunky pixels smooth into high res. I'm alone, a kid on the beach, dressed in my favorite outfit from when I was 11 years old, pale jeans and a striped sweater. I'm standing upon an undulating dune of shiny monads. They're like pebbles and grains of sand. The ocean has ebbed way far out, yes. Tame old consensus reality is taking a break. I'm free to roam. I trot down the dune, feeling peace and joy like I've never felt before. The exposed ocean floor is a gravel of monads, some of them as big as eggs or fists. It's like I'm walking on the scree you might find on a mountain slope, a chaotic clutter of variegated stones. The monads aren't being heavy-handed about reflecting each other. They merely sketch each other's images using flecks and nicks. Heading further from the dune, I encounter some talismans. Like I'm in a medieval painting with physical graffiti and heavy metaphors, parables of unknown meaning. I see a meter-long section of a soda fountain counter with a milkshake in a steel mixing container. Part of the shake's been poured into a tall glass. A mound of whipped cream tops the glass, plus a sprinkle of nuts and a monadic slice of banana. Blood on the side of the steel container. I steer clear. I see a blackboard hanging in midair with Schrodinger's famous wave equation chalked onto it, a fundamental axiom of quantum mechanics. Part of the equation has been erased, or no, the chalk has crawled down the board. It's not chalk, actually. It's a swarm of pale ants. Further on, I find a seaman's logbook on the pebbles underfoot. The book has a tooled leather cover embossed with Shirley's initials. Leery of opening the book, I fling it into the air. It spins and flutters. It flaps like a butterfly, rustling its pages, thumping its covers. A single gossamer-thin sheet drifts my way, swooping right and left. My new formula is written on the page. My world-generating monad rule, refined down to 10 symbols, including a pair of brackets around the spot where the secret code parameter is supposed to go. Feeling a fierce rush of joy, I press the sheet against my face. It melts into my skin like lotion. Right after the book, I find a classic pirate-style treasure chest. It's half open with a plump, warty sea cucumber resting upon the colored gem-like monads within. The echinoderm sets smoky sparks to sputtering from its forked feelers. The sparks sketch my formula in midair, and I feel another spasm of exultation. I'm the queen of this hidden world. I find a chair beside a table laden with roast turkey, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of wine. I'm hungrier than I've ever been. I plump myself down and devour every scrap of the repast, including the glass bottle and the turkey bones, and then I eat the table and the chair. My stomach bulges. I overate. I'm feeling weird cramps. I totter onward, and here's the final talisman, Shirley Chen's corpse. Awkward on the ground in a splatter of blood, her skull is deformed from the taxi's impact. One of her dead eyes has popped from its socket. I look away. A distant roar. A crenellated shape on the horizon. A giant wave. The ocean of daily drone is on its way back. I barely have time to resurrect Shirley, if that's what I'm going to do. But how? A band of pain clamps my abdomen. Somehow I'm controlling this. I'm giving myself labor pains. I collapse upon the gravel. I convulse and strain. I tear off my jeans and open my legs. My crotch splits up to my navel, and a shining egg squeezes out, bigger than a baby. I press my hands to my belly, and my torn flesh closes up. The surcease of pain is delicious. I sit up and check on the monster wave. It's still a few kilometers away, but it's closer than before. Hurry, Erit. I focus on dead Shirley Chen. I'm running on automatic with a chain of syllogisms pouring forth from the monad that is me. That shiny egg I birthed, obviously I should open it. With a single motion of my wheel, I form a hatchet in my hand. My cosmic 10-symbol monad rule is engraved on one side of the blade. I slam the hatchet into the egg. It splits open, and yes, something's inside. The parameter known as secret code. It doesn't look like a number or like a point in Hilbert space. She looks like a foot-high, cream-colored giraffe with rust-colored spots. Her spots bulge out like knobs. Her head is odd, a blank eyeless bulb with a hole in one side. I try to catch the knobby giraffe, but she dodges me and takes off, skipping along atop the larger monads, nimble as a goat on stepping stones. Monads crack open beneath her hooves, hatching out smaller knobby giraffes, and the smaller knobby giraffes stampede off, and their smaller hooves are cracking open smaller monads, releasing yet smaller giraffes. Each of them bears the same pattern of spots. I'm in the midst of a tippity-tapping herd, me still standing by Shirley's corpse. I managed to catch one of the littler giraffes and I cup her between my two hands like a trapped mouse. I can feel the flutter of her legs. I coo to her. I form petitioning thoughts. I project empathy. I imagine I'm capable of love. And now this particular giraffe and I are quantum entangled, a monadic dyad. She can't run away from me until I say so. She stands on my right palm, poised, tense, alert, with a blank lump at the end of her neck instead of a head. Perhaps she sees via the bulging, velvety spots on her body, or via a complex process of deduction. She is, after all, the secret seed that generates the world. Can you still hear? Okay. I bend the knee of the giraffe's right front leg, and the scene around me shifts, as if she were a game controller. The ocean floor tilts. Hummocks segue into veils. The milling herd of her sisters drifts to one side. Each of them is holding their right front knee at the same angle. The light seems yellower than before. But Shirley stays dead, even though my one desire is to raise her. My knobby giraffe knows what I want. I manipulate her legs some more, with all the other giraffes in sync, to no avail. By now, the reality tsunami is less than a kilometer away, a flowing wall that reaches into the sky. Airborne droplets of spray dampen my face. I'm pleading to my giraffe, yelling at her, and then finally I think to take hold of her unfinished-looking head. A tingle travels up my arm and down my spine, a jolt. I scream Shirley's name. The knobby giraffe's voice echoes me, hoarse, eldritch, shrill. The other giraffes are screaming too. The sound goes on and on. I kneel beside Shirley and kiss her lifeless lips. She twitches, blinks, warms to my touch, stands and smiles. We hug. The great wave subsonic vibrations are beating in my chest. Shirley and I run for higher ground. As we reach the summit of our dune, the wave breaks. Foamy currents surge around our legs. We leap upwards and emerge into my parents' apartment. Shirley and I are alive, looking normal, and yes, I'm still holding that one knobby giraffe. But nothing in the family's apartment looks right. My parents aren't here. 3 hipsters loll on what was once my father's favorite couch. The buildings outside are covered with neon signs. I nudge the knobby giraffe. The walls of the apartment flow and Pa is back. He looks sad. Without him even saying anything, I know that Ma is dead. I bend the giraffe's leg and press one of her knobs. Across the river, Manhattan is a flat mound of rubble. I wiggle the giraffe's long neck. Brooklyn is a grassy field with cows and UFOs. Maybe we stay here, says Shirley, still at my side. She understands what's going on. Hilbert's face is big. So many possible values for secret code. If you keep this up, things might get worse. One more try, I say. My giraffe can do it. I focus on my happy times with Shirley like it was before. I don't physically prod the knobby giraffe, but mentally I'm begging her. And then, behold, I'm in my parents' apartment with Ma and Pa. It's that same New York morning in April, and I'm supposed to monitor that lab after I stop by my apartment. And those toothpicks are on the floor. Shirley's not here with my parents, but I feel sure that she's in our apartment, lying in our bed, reading a research paper, and yes, I've made things the way you want, says the knobby giraffe. Her voice is a thin, raspy whisper from the hole in her head. And now you'll set me free. Okay, I say, and thanks. I feel a tingle in my palm, and the secret code creature is gone. I'm slyly thinking that I haven't really given up anything. The monad rule formula is safe in my head. What was that, Pa is asking me. Did something just happen? I really do have to go. Good luck, says Ma, watching me. The queen of the night. On the street outside my parents' apartment building, I look into my mind to check that, yes, I still have 10 symbols lined up. But wait, that's a frickin' Manhattan phone number? Oh my God, that's Shirley's mobile number. I take out my phone and dial. Hi, Erie, says Shirley. Where have you been? I'm waiting.
We're going to take a break. I'd like to just raise a question before we do, which is for discussion, which we have 2 scientists who I think use science in a very different way in their fiction. So it's one of the things I want to talk about. Everybody, we're going to take a 7.1 minute break. Everybody's going to get a drink, and then we're going to join back here. It will all be on the test, so no one can leave. Okay? Thank you. That was great.
To find out how you can attend SFNSF or to see the upcoming schedule of readings, go to sfnsf.org. Or you can follow the event on Twitter at SFNSF Events and on Meetup under SFNSF Events.
Okay, folks, time for round 2 with Terry Bisson, Michael Blumlein, and Rudy Rucker. Before we go any further, I want to again thank you all for coming out tonight. I also would like to do a shout out to our sponsors, not only Borderlands Books, who is here selling, Wizards Tower, who maintains our website, the Balboa Theater that hosts our film events, and above all, Tachyon Publications, who is our big behind-the-scenes sponsor, and you can find their fabulous books online at tachyonpublications.com.
Right. And also, the sponsors, we have the Volkswagen Engineering Department, which is sponsoring the entire field of science fiction.
if you didn't catch that aside from Terry, just corner him at a convention and he'll explain it somehow. So,
until he makes you laugh.
Yes. The last thing I want to mention before we go on with our Q&A is that SF&SF also runs a newsletter. So if you want information about upcoming events, if you want to get the link to the podcast, which is also a really excellent, wonderful benefit of our programming, and that is provided by Rusty and Marin and their able assistant Dave here from SomaFM, San Francisco's fabulous internet-only radio. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll get a link for the podcast so you can listen to it again. You can forward it on to people. The authors use it for PR, so you can go to their sites later on and check it out as well. And it's just a nice thing to have. It stands as our record of the events, and you can go to that at any time and listen later. So anyways, so I hope you've all thought up some really, great questions for our authors, something they've never thought of before or have been asked before, which can actually happen. So I'm going to turn this back over again to Mr. Terry Bisson, our moderator. Thank you.
So, we've had our writers, but you guys are part of the process, so I'm asking, we want to discuss our two writers, their works, also the field in which they're embedded and the field which they resist. I noticed one thing. I said at the beginning, they're both actual professors and professionals in a scientific field, and both scientists, but I'm thinking, it struck me what a different way they both use their scientific training. I think, as Michael pointed out, science to him is order, dispassionate order. It's, it's actual, objective, dispassionate, orderly, and beautiful. And Rudy, I think, sees science as a box of wonders that that is far from orderly, but is quite lively, and I think it's a different way of looking at it. Don't you?
Should I say something? I like that Michael was saying the cancer cell was beautiful. I thought that was interesting. Anything in nature, it never disappoints if you look at it hard enough. It's always beautiful. And has to do with the fractal nature of reality. And basically it means if you look at something twice as hard, you see 3 times as much detail. And if you look at it 4 times as hard, you're going to see 9 times as much detail. You always get back more than you put in. And before the show, we got here early, and Sylvia left me. She was walking faster than me. So I was in Bloomingdale's.
She has swifter crutches.
Yeah. She doesn't even have crutches. And it's sort of boring in Bloomingdale's, And then I went out and I sat at a bus stop with some hallucinating wino at the other end. And I watched the buses go by, and that was so much more interesting than this carefully manicured little reality. But I thought in a way, Michael's story was like science fiction. I mean, life is like science fiction, isn't it? These things that we can't imagine happening are happening to us. There's only one trip, and that's the heavy one that we're taking. I don't know. Why don't you say something, Michael?
I'm just thinking I said what I had to say. I'm going to leave.
Come on, give us a dumb question. Yes, or a smart question.
I'm curious about the idea of the Schrodinger's cat beating the Schrodinger's cat topic, the observer creating reality idea and quantum physics, and that's an idea that I used to be very excited about, but having seen so many bad treatments of it in, sort of new age pseudoscience, quasi-science, I've become very skeptical about it, sort of like our physics professor. And I wonder if you think that it's a dead horse topic or that there's still a lot of mystery and wonder left in it.
Well, the sort of catch there is that if my mind can change the reality, so can everybody else's. And I used to worry about that at one point. I guess I was in my 30s. If I got on a plane, I figure the only way a plane will crash will be if every single person on the plane is projecting the reality that they want the plane to crash. And then I'd look around at all the people around me, they look kind of dour, and I can't trust them. You know? So it would be up to me to like fight away the thought that the plane might crash. And I think maybe that's an idea. It's basically sort of a psychotic idea that you can control reality. It's not a reasonable idea to have. I think at another level, there are things that happen that just seem so amazing, and you think, did I make that happen? I think what it's really more like, I think reality is more like a really well-written novel. And it's been through a lot of drafts, a lot of drafts. And it's just so organized, but not in an obvious order that like, well, nature is organized, but it's always beautiful. You know, things are just scattered just so, you know. And reality, there's this big, it's arranged so things do connect, and there are patterns that make sense, and things make more sense than you would expect them to. Like in a novel, things echo each other, things mirror each other, things prefigure each other, things connect. And I think the world is like that. Things do happen. It's not just, it's better than just, you know, some crappy trillion dice throws. There's this kind of innate order to it. And where that came from, again, I mean, you could say, well, there's the great author, you know. And, you know, we writers don't mind that idea, you know. But there might not be the great author. It's sort of, after all, I mean, our minds compared to the world, we're like the animalcules in Leeuwenhoek's microscope, you know, speculating about Leeuwenhoek, you know. Would that be good to eat, you know?
There's a story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I think there is something profound about reality and its structuring, but I don't think it's just wish fulfillment is a reality.
Please.
Okay, here's a really dumb question.
Oh boy.
So my attention sort of wandered for a minute when that whole scene with the giraffe and all that, what was that? Was that a dream or what?
Well,
Why don't you have other people explain it?
the where I got that idea, there was a book I used to read my children. I think it was called The Five Chinese Brothers, and it's like the ocean goes way out, and this little boy goes out and he's finding all these treasures, and then the ocean comes. Oh, because one of the brothers could inhale the ocean. That's right. He had the whole ocean in his mouth, and then the guy can't hold the water anymore. He spits the water out. They're telling the boy come back. The boy drowns. And anyway, but the whole thing, whenever there's a tidal wave too, but right before the tidal wave comes, the ocean goes really far out, and there's always these people, you know, oh, I'm going to get my basket and go collect sea cucumbers, you know. And so I thought of that, and I thought, well, what if reality could just flow out like the ocean, and we could see what's under it. We could see the ocean floor. And so that's the place where she is. It's this thing that underlies the daily world. And then to just make it colorful, I put in these Salvador Dali-like vignettes, you know, these little items. And the knobby giraffe, that was just a phrase that came to me once. I read Leibniz's monadology. You hear about it, but hardly anyone ever reads it. And one day I was actually in a hotel in North Beach, and for some reason I was alone. I was there for some con or something. And I looked on the web, and there I found my Leibniz's monadology, and it's only about 30 pages long, you know. And it's very close to being complete gibberish. So I read it. And then, I don't know, somehow I got the idea, you know, what does a monad look like? And he never quite gets into that, you know. And then, I for some reason, I thought of the phrase knobby giraffe. And then, yeah, and so then I had a story. So.
You could sell knobby giraffes.
Yeah.
Franchise.
Cliff. Oh, Cliff's got his hand up back there.
Please.
Thanks. Hi. Both of you guys talked about being alone, profoundly alone as human beings, like when your protagonist was on the beach underneath reality by herself, and, you know, when you're talking about, Michael, when you're talking about just being alone. And everything, it occurs to me that everything that we do when we come to these SF and SF events, or when we're reading, or when we're relating to one another, other than saying, you know, drinking together and hugging or whatever before or after the event, is words, is this code that we use. This it's like the 10-part equation. It's this thing that we use that intermediates between us as animals and allows us to, you know, visualize what you see as the beauty of a cancer cell. Not visualizing what we would see in a microscope, but visualizing what you see when you look through a microscope, or what you see when you think of a knobby giraffe. And I just, a lot of us who are writers here or readers, we spend a lot of our time working in this code, either reading the code or writing the code and spending time in the code. And I was wondering if you would reflect in any way, if this is even possible, in the connection that the code, which is language, provides, and the distance and the isolation that is fundamental to existence. But, you know, other animals also communicate without this code, and there's real communication, as anyone who's ever had a dog or a cat or something knows. Or a baby. So I've had all of those as in sequence. So, Michael, especially, I'm curious about your thoughts with regard to your experience, and also with Rudy, about connection and isolation and separateness and togetherness and whatever. 42.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of in this cancer dream, this cancer world that I'm living in for the last few years. And that's a particular world. So what I've been thinking of relates to that. And there's a lot of thinking about, there's a lot of back and forth between being alone, being at heart. We feeling very alone and feeling I'm going to die eventually. I've seen enough death to know that eventually, little by little, you withdraw. That's kind of a natural mechanism of an organism. The outside world, I think, starts becoming less and less distinct. The contacts that are not as strong start falling away, and the ones that are dearest and deepest stay, but eventually they fall away too. And I'm assuming, or I'm hoping for sure, but I'm assuming that just feels very normal and reassuring when the time comes, that it's what I'll have to do, what we all have to do to disconnect from the connections that we have. And I'm assuming that it'll be just fine. But it's scary it's also scary to think of that. So the other side of thinking about that is that at different times I feel incredibly super attached and super wanting to communicate, as you were saying, super wanting to hold on. You know, we all talk about it. Okay, you have so much time left. Do what's most important, what's most precious to you. And it's this very day to day, hour to hour often, for me, since I'm a cyclic, moody person, minute to minute, this dance between wanting to, while I'm here, wanting to attach and love the buses going by like Rudy, and appreciate like the ugliness as beauty, appreciate it all, you know, the work of man and the work of nature. Work of nature is mostly better than the work of man, but man-made music, and music is pretty great, you know. I was thinking, God, how can we, the world will end. Well, I don't mind losing, you know, this wall or that bus, but God, to lose rock and roll and Bach, and, you know, and Vivaldi, oh my God. But it's this dance for me between wanting to stay like intensely involved and attached, and realizing that you have to be detached, or you're going to make yourself miserable and very unhappy if you don't know that it's fleeting. You know, this is, I think, the Zen Buddhist thing that and I'm not a Zen Buddhist, so it's very foreign to me, but I'm learning that that's kind of where it's at. But I'm assuming it's going to be taken care of. I'm just assuming, you know, if there's not too much pain along the way, I'm assuming that that our body knows, you know, like animals know, that they just go away and they figure it out. I feel like I'm going to know it. So mostly I'm okay. I'm reassured with that stuff. I don't know, that I riffed, you asked.
That makes sense. You actually used the word intelligent to Zen.
Oh yeah, that was very. Yeah, I wasn't sure I should use that.
I think it's quite deliberate.
You know what I say? When you look, I think what I read was just part of what I actually wrote, and I think I talk about a little more in what I wrote. But if you ever get a chance to look at your own tissue, your own self, I mean, it's fun enough to look at your bones, right? Your skull. I mean, who doesn't love that? And look at the prominences and the sockets, and I mean, you see, like Rudy was saying, if you hold up a bone, and the first thing, it's a bone, and it's got this side and this side. If you spend some time looking at it, you see the pinpoint little holes, and when you look at it first, you'd say that, you know, some ate this, but no, that's where a nerve comes out, or it's where a little vein goes in. And there's a rhyme and reason why it goes in there, because right there's a tiny little upsweep in the ridge of that bone, which means that there's a little ligament that folds over that and protects maybe that structure so it doesn't get damaged when you're running and you bang your shin. And then there's stress ridges, and you find all these beautiful things. But that's just on the macro level. If you get to go deeper and deeper, and I just was looking through a light microscope, which is a beautiful thing with all the different stains we have. You can see things, but now we can see things with the scanning microscope, and that's now old. You know, that's 30 years. But the scanning microscope, we're seeing. What is it? Someone tell me. But we're seeing viruses that are as huge as elephants, and it's miraculous. And we're seeing them embedded in our tissue. So we're just seeing this landscape that Rudy paints in his writing with his imagination. And good for him. Thoreau wrote at a time when we had we didn't have photography or just the rudiment. So you had to write about it. And that's what's wonderful when you read that 19th century naturalist writing. These guys knew how to write. They knew how to describe things so that you could see them and feel them in a way that Raymond Carver certainly didn't have, and Hemingway didn't have. Rudy Rucker gave a little of that today. I know it was wild. It's not what you'd see under a microscope, but you know, he got into it. He didn't shy away from giving you the details of his fever dream, and that's what you see like under the microscope. And I urge you to say yes if someone offers you the chance to dissect
Rudy.
Rudy's brain.
Well, I'm just going to... Pat.
Listening to both pieces, I was thinking about one of the reasons I write is to try to make sense of the world, to try to find order in a disordered world. And it occurred to me that that is also, of course, one of the goals of science. And I don't know whether that's just because we're science fiction writers or whether just because I'm a science fiction writer that I tend to go in that direction. It was interesting, Michael, that it really felt like you were using the writing to help yourself find order. And Rudy, it seems like you often use writing to seek disorder. So now I'll let you guys comment.
I do like going into my writing worlds. Often in my stories, the main character will somehow leave regular reality. They'll go through some space tunnel, or they'll get inside a giant squid, or something will happen to them. And really that's a metaphor for what I'm doing when I write a novel. Because I'm getting on this interstellar ship, and it's going to be a couple of years till I get back. And I get all these wonderful new friends that live in there. I just finished a book today that I've been working on for almost 2 years. And yeah, I'm going to miss my imaginary friends. The giant bagpipe, he's bad. The flat cow is sort of good. But it's...
We've got the knobby giraffe.
The knobby giraffe. I miss her a little bit.
You know, let me just say something, responding to Pat. I think, I don't want to speak for Rudy, but you can say whether this is true or not. Being a scientist and you're a mathematician, we kind of assume that the world is ordered. I mean, medicine depends on having an ordered world. Reproducible results, you do, and it depends on that. You can't give treatments or make diagnoses unless you can trust your results. And mathematics the attempts at mathematics is supremely disordered. And so for me, I'll speak for myself, science fiction is actually a way to, the order can't help but be there, but I use it to sort of be, try to be, let my impulse, be impulsive and let my imagination run free, not necessarily tethered to order, because there's a bedrock of order there. And I know Rudy, that's my feeling when I read Rudy too. If you read it seems so wild and everything, but he always brings it back to he's toying with some mathematical principle which underlies it.
Well, the great thing is chaos, is that this thing mathematicians and physicists started talking about in the 70s and 80s. And that's this great thing that you can have formal systems with laws, but then the things that come out of that system, they're not readily predictable. I mean, the thing like you learn initially when you're talking about shooting a cannon, well, the ball goes along this precise parabola, so without even tracking its trail, I can know where it'll be, 10 minutes from now. But then you bring in chaos and a lot of natural processes. You can compute what they would do, but it'll take you like an hour to compute what they would be doing an hour from now. There's no shortcut. And a lot of nature is like that. And once people could wrap their minds around it, people sort of resisted the idea for a while. They mocked it, they were against it. But once you sort of let that idea into your heart, it's sort of obvious that the things that are interesting in the world, like the grain in the wood on one of these things, that's not, you don't just plug, 2 numbers into a formula and you get that, like the pattern of grain that you have in one of these beams. The way you could get it from a formula, you could get it from the formula, but you'd have to iterate the formula for about 1 million times, and it would slowly build it up. So there's this great richness to the world, and there's this essential randomness. Another thing, the self-expression thing. I mean, I was a mathematician, and I've written science books, but there's always the thing, when you write a novel, you're able to put your whole self into it. And that's the thing that you're missing if you're writing about science. I mean, a good science writer does put, they do this sort of new journalism thing. They put more and more of themselves into it. But it's not even always that welcome. Who cares what he had for breakfast? But in a novel, you can, have the characters be emulating people that you know or that yourself, and you can get all these emotions and things in there. That's what's fun about them. That's why they're sort of more fun than doing straight science. And Michael's piece today, it started out with sort of talking about the man of science, Thoreau, and then you start like sort of almost angrily harshing on him for not telling us what it was like when he was dying. And then you're like, all right, I'll show you what that's like. And then you get into these kind of haunting journal entries. You're really opening up there. I mean, you might not have even thought of ever sharing them when you wrote them. But they're, beautiful. And then you say, well, let's not just do that. Then you jump back out and you start looking for making some kind of synthesis out of it at the end. It was beautiful. And you wrote that with your whole self. And you even had some science in there.
It made me, let me just put in one little, I was thinking of Octavia Butler. What was her first series about the Owen Collie or whatever it was? Xenogenesis, which the first thing I ever read by her, and she was talking about these aliens who they found us irresistible. They had a crush on us, and which is a whole new way of doing first contact. Nobody ever done, her. And then you find out what they really have a crush on is cancer, because that's unique to this being, and that's what stirred them up, and that's what, before I knew she was a black woman, before I knew she had any of these credits which she has, it was just the way that it was this totally unique thing of people writing biological hard science, which I had never encountered, So anyway, that's Octavia, who's unfortunately not here. But it also seems to me like the assumption of order, which is true of a scientist or a mathematician, is also true of a plumber, a mechanic, a farmer. Right. That's the deepest. I think the deepest thing in us is the assumption of order. So if somebody raised their hand, and not Cliff, I've already heard from him. Isaac.
Hello. So some quick vignettes. So Michael said that, oh my God, humans invented music. It's like, yeah, but I think we invented music by listening to the birds, and some say we invented language by listening to the birds. And Michael is talking about withdrawing, and it's like 2 months ago I was seeing this 1 billion pixel photograph of Andromeda, which I'd never seen before, and I have to withdraw from that. I've just barely taken off my hat and shaken its hand. And also, Michael is talking about January 2013, the 18th, the 4th, the 15th, so on and so forth. And it really struck a pang with me, because that was when I was desperately trying to the edges of veterinary science not to have my cat's leg amputated, which happened on the last day of January. So it was very personal. And I think that both offerings tonight reflected on this kind of schism in the human mind, which has brought about a human culture. I don't necessarily think it's endemic to the human mind, and that is between experience and explanation. We're curious about both, but when experience, aka passion becomes too chaotic or too seductive, we long for explanation, which is curiosity divided by experiment and quantification and science. And when explanation becomes just too dry and like isolating, we long for experience. And because we're humans, we can't seem to bring experience and explanation, passion and investigation into the same mental transcendence. So do either of the four of you have any explanation of that?
All right.
Michael, you take that one.
Yeah, that's where music comes in.
The rose bleeding the lungs offer quite a melody.
We're talking about the Allman Brothers here. Okay. No, Grania first, and then Richard.
Oh, well, Richard can go. I wanted to say, Rudy, I was so transfixed by the painterly quality of your writing. When you speak about detail and patterns and it's you're speaking as you're showing us a painting. When I read, I try to think of it as a film. You don't have any blank spaces in a film. You don't leave anything out. You have to fill in the whole frame. But you do it in such a painterly way. It was just beautiful. And then Michael, of course, that was a very personal story. You as someone said, things that we can only imagine, but now we can imagine it in so much more detail. But I don't want to get into TMI. But my husband was a physician. You were his absolutely favorite writer. He passed away from lung cancer a few years ago. When people, this is relevant, when people asked him towards the end, what do you enjoy? What do you, he said, well, I enjoy watching the progress of my disease. It interests me.
Wow.
And yes, Buddhism is good stuff.
We have it from the source. Okay.
I'll say something about the visual images. To me, writing is very visual. I need to see the scene in my mind before I can write it. And sometimes I'll have to wait a while until I can finally see it. I'll even do sketches, or sometimes I'll even do a painting so I can totally see what it looks like. And in a way, the painting is sort of like, you could say it's like for a scientist doing an experiment, because you see things happen, you see what's actually out there, and then you have a better image. And the more visual I can make it, the better, the happier I am. And I'll even come back, when I'm rereading it, I'll just, sometimes it just seems like too much work. I'll say, okay, what does this room look like? This is supposed to be an interesting place. And you can't, like the worst kind of science fiction story, somebody wakes up in a blank white room. All right, I'm out of here.
All right, Richard.
Thanks. Listening to the piece you read, Michael, I was thinking about the very first story I ever encountered you, tissue ablation. And I was thinking in a weird way, there was like this circular kind of quality to it, to that very early thing and what you read tonight. And thinking about that, it was the first time it occurred to me, I don't know why, you're like the most body-oriented science fiction writer I can think of, just over the course of what you've written. And does that come from the doctor? Does the doctor and the fiction come from the same place in this core interest, or is this some sort of conscious construction?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes.
Thank you for that.
See how it's easy to do Q&A? Next question. Yeah. You know, Richard, having cancer now, I've gone back and looked at some of the stuff I've written. I've written about cancer so many times in various guises. So that's not exactly what you asked, but I have I've written a lot about bodies and my fascination with bodies, and there is a total. I'm completely a professional. I want to not disclose. I want to say that at the outset. As a physician, I'm completely a professional. But I'm also a voyeur because bodies are just amazingly varied and interesting, and I've had the privilege of that part of one part of nature to have seen thousands of them very intimately, and I'm also extremely aware of my own body, and for most of my life until I got sick, it served me really, really, really well in all the ways you want a body to serve you, in all the great ways, physically and sensually and emotionally and sports. I've been, and for most of my life, like many of us, I never thought much about it because you don't think about what works for you, and then when it stops working, you start thinking a little bit more. But if you're a doctor, or maybe even if you're not, you get to think about it. I mean, when your body goes wrong, that's just an opportunity to enjoy it more because you get to understand why it's going wrong and all the different things that work. That's very intellectual. That's not the physical part that you're talking about. But I've always been a sensualist. That's sort of the tradition that I came of age in. The take drugs, take your clothes off, and just rub up against other people, and that hasn't stopped. That hasn't stopped. And I just. I don't think I knew I wanted to be a doctor before I knew I had a body, and that was interesting to me, but it certainly hasn't hurt that. It's been a great privilege and pleasure to be able to see and help other people.
I should mention your novel, The Healer.
The Healer.
Yeah.
That's a very medical novel.
Oh.
That's a very cool book. Very sick. But healthy.
Speaking of drugs, how great is Dilaudid?
I saw Richard's eyes light up when I read that. Yeah, I recommend. Well, here's a side, so I actually was looking forward to that because a friend of mine had gone surgery, and now they put in lines with where you don't have to call the nurse. It used to be you had to call the nurse to come and give you your drug every 4 hours or whenever you needed it. Now it's on a button, but they control it. You just don't get as much as you want, and that's an evolving story. For years and years. Now we're reading a lot about the opioid problem. I'm sure you've all seen it. Well, I have to say, for the majority of my time as a doctor, people were so under-medicated in terms of pain control. It just was so I'm not seeing this as a big problem. I understand that it's a problem, but it's on a different. It's not a problem to me as a doctor. To me, it's a solution that we're finally acknowledging that people are not going to be addicted if you give them pain control when they're in pain. That's a different problem. But anyway, so the personal part I was looking forward to, and I got it, and I was coming out of the second surgery, which was much harder than the first, and I was pushing it, and I would say, oh, wow, but it didn't work, and the pain kept, and the day went by, and I was getting worse and worse, and it turned out, there's all sorts of levels of technology. it has to work if the needle is in place and the line is open. But that doesn't always happen, because there's human error, because a human has to put the needle in. And for me, the needle wasn't in place. So I didn't get that great experience of swimming in a damn sea of it was one day, but.
Did they fix it on the second day?
No, they pulled it out, and we did, that's more detail than you need to know. But you depend on, I've also learned from this, and doctors do their best, They just do their best. They're not there to fuck up, but they fuck up. We all fuck up. Most of the time we don't. Most of the time we do good. If you get an A, that's 90%. That's 90 out of 100. Everyone would be happy with an A, right? But that's 10%. You're fucking up. It happens. Yeah.
Well, that was a great compliment that Richard paid, I think, and it's true of your work.
I don't know if you know Richard. He's reading next month. And
the reason I'm calling everybody by their first name is because there's so many writers here that I know.
Well, it's like...
But I could relate to what Richard said. I mean, I remember the greatest compliment I ever got. Somebody said, I read your books, I don't know what they look like or whether they were male or female, but I know what kind of car they drove. And I felt like I had achieved.
We have a question back here.
What?
We have a question back, and we're going to make you segue.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I was just curious. I've been listening through this whole thing. Except for the few mentions that you did about Zen Buddhism, it seems that almost everything that I've heard has been based on a Western idea of what is experience or investigation. And there are actually cultures in this country that don't ever think about experimentation because to them the real world is nature and they're part of it. So they can never be detached from it. They come from it and they go back to it. And I just wondered if you'd ever looked into some of those cultures and got some thought from those.
Thinking.
The Zen Buddhism question, yeah.
Well, I've always loved esoteric wisdom. It's there's something. Some of the esoteric wisdom in many cultures is often, it comes down to a lot of the ideas are sort of similar. Aldous Huxley once did an anthology called The Perennial Philosophy, and he was getting quotes out of, this great range of sacred texts. And, ideas like all is one, or love thy neighbor, be in the moment. These are all things. It's hard to remember to do them, and sometimes it helps to go to a meditation group and they remind you. But if you're suffering and in pain, that reminds you to do them.
I would say some of what I read talked about being in nature, in this case being in the mountains and nature. And I was just looking, a friend of mine, I was a Boy Scout when I was young, and a friend of mine just sent me some photos from those days. And I saw, which I didn't remember, and the Boy Scouts was part of, at least my part of the Boy Scouts was based on some American Indian, Native American traditions. And I was reminded of that because in the photographs, some of the ceremonies showed these young white men dressed in Indian in feathered headdresses and living in teepees. And I remembered I was elected to not a secret society, but a special society called Order of the Arrow. Anyway, this was awarded to certain Boy Scouts. And part of the tradition was you went where we were, you went out, you had to spend a whole day and a night, you had to spend a night by yourself. And you were blindfolded, or maybe not blindfolded, you were put in a canoe and you were canoed across a lake by moonlight, and then you were put in the woods, and you didn't quite have to fast because you were given a bologna sandwich, and that was and then you fasted, and then the next day, and then you were honored, and during the night people were stationed around the lake with little fires, dressed in Indian costumes, Native American costumes, and they were drumming and stuff. And I bring that up because I've spent a lot of times. The place I prefer to be is not in a city, but in Mother Nature. And I talked about the mountains, but that includes other lots of kinds of nature. And I think that the Native American tradition, without my formally acknowledging that connection, was probably instrumental has been instrumental in both in my life and my continued health and pleasure in nature, where I seek. It's my religion. Who said that? It's on our fridge. Who said that, Hillary? My religion is nature. But I think that has a direct line to the Native American communities. Yeah.
That's why I asked the question, because I'm part Native American, and a lot of the things that you're talking about are not natural to us because we don't do it that way. That's a bad way to say it because I don't know how to say it, but you're there, nature's there, you're part of it, and you're going to come. You came from there, and you're going to go back to there. Yeah. So we don't have that tension about dying or about any of those other things. We have tension about being broken because we're trying to do the other thing. Older Indians say when you start picking up why this is doing it with the kind of Western investigation, you kill yourself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered if you, and obviously you did because you just said you did. But that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, seriously.
It's enough.
This is a treat. I like both these writers, and
You like everybody to.
no, it's not true.
Just ask him personally, in private.
Yeah, but we'll do that in private. Thank you all. We do this. Thank Rena, who books she books the act here. Rena makes it happen. We want to thank the museum, and good night.
You've been listening to the SF in SF podcast.
SF in SF podcast was recorded by SomaFM, produced by Maren McDonald, and engineered by Rusty Hodge. Thanks for listening, and find out more about SomaFM, 30 channels of listener-supported commercial-free internet radio at somafm.com. Thanks for listening.
SomaFM.